Good evening. I have been asked if there is a way in which we can train ourselves to practice the presence of God, some simple way that everyone on the face of the globe could practice. And there is such a way. It is a way that has very, very deep possibilities. And yet it is so simple that it can be taught to a 6-year-old child. And that way is this. Let us assume for a moment that this is a telephone and the bell rings. And I pick up the receiver, and ordinarily it's this way. Hello. Now, let us change that mode, and within 3 days watch a miracle in your life. Pick up your receiver, wait a second, and then say hello. And very quickly you'll begin to see the miracles come in your life. In this brief and then hello, you have waited for the Christ to enter. And it enters. If we do this, you are out there on the phone and I'm here, hello, and you say hello. They're two human beings. They can be friendly, they can be unfriendly. They can start friendly and end up with a fight. But the moment that I learn to pick this up, admit the Christ, and then talk, there are 3 of us. There is you and me and the Christ between us. And the presence of that Christ between us levels the whole of human experience and makes it a spiritual one. Out of 2 human beings, it makes 2 spiritual beings. Out of misunderstanding, it makes for understanding. Out of incompatibility, it makes for understanding, harmony, and peace. Now, when that practice is followed in every detail of our lives, for instance, sitting down to breakfast in the morning and never touching anything on the plate there until the blink of the eye, that momentary pause which admits the Christ, acknowledges the Christ. Never leaving home, never crossing the doorsill without touching the knob of the door and then waiting that second for the Christ to go before. Never going into a door, through a doorway, into a building without a momentary pause which admits the Christ before you. Never going marketing, never going shopping, never going up to a counter to buy anything, never sitting down in a restaurant without that momentary pause. And you see, it changes all relationships, because instead of 2 human beings facing each other as human beings, that invisible, intangible presence, this transcendental being called Christ or the Spirit of God or the Comforter, that enters our relationship. And that transforms our relationships. That transforms the relationships between buyers and salespeople. between employers and employees, between teachers and students. It changes the entire aspect of one's life. And you see, it not only operates as a leveler between us, in all of our relationships, but pausing for the admission of the Christ, we no longer depend on our human wisdom. That pause lets in the spiritual guidance. We make no decision. We wait for that spiritual guidance. We do not open our mouths to talk without waiting for that spiritual presence. Every activity of the day, none can be neglected, although at the first, I'm frank to say that 3/4 of them are neglected the first day, or second or third, and then you remember, oh, I forgot the last time, and you begin all over again. But that's all right, there's no harm done. The thing is that we begin, and that every time we forget to admit the Christ, that we redouble our efforts to remember it the next time. And until the day comes when it is not so much a conscious effort as almost, you might say, an involuntary effort. It is done without conscious thinking. You just automatically do it. It's like driving a car and then afterward wondering how it is that you drove it when you can't remember shifting gears or touching this, that, or the other thing, and yet it all took place. Now, you see, if we lean unto our own understanding, then we have the usual experiences of good and evil. But if in all things we acknowledge the divine presence, then we have the aid of that spiritual entity that we call the Christ. And you will find that there is no better way to begin training in this than just this illustration of the telephone. Hello? And then the Christ has come between us, and it becomes a contact within us, and it becomes a gentleness within us that may not have been there before, or it becomes more understanding or more patience, so forth and so on. You see, when Paul says, I live, yet not I, Christ liveth my life, that is what he means. He means I don't walk through doors. The Christ walks through before me to greet me on the other side. I don't digest food. The Christ goes before me to digest it. I don't buy and I don't sell. The Christ goes before me. He performeth that which is given me to do. He perfecteth that which concerneth me. How can he do it if you don't admit him? Do you see that? There is no he unless you yourself admit into this relationship that he. There's just you and me. But one of us has to admit this transcendental presence into the relationship. Then harmony can prevail. Now, this is called practicing the presence of God. It really means acknowledging the presence of God in all thy ways. It means that you acknowledge that there is something more to your and my relationship than just human good, than just some human relationship, that between us there exists a spiritual bond that unites us in oneness in God. You're not only blessing yourself, remember, you are blessing every individual you contact during the day, because you are bringing the Christ into their experience, even while they themselves do not know what this spiritual power is. And very often you'll hear people say, what is it that you have that we haven't got? What is it that you have? What is it that your people have? What is it that your group has that others haven't got? And you might give a dozen different explanations, but there is only one true explanation, and that is that we have this transcendental, spiritual, invisible presence and power always operating in us, through us, for us, as our very daily experience. Now I would like to bring to your attention this point. God is, and God fills this room. That is available to you and to me only in proportion as we open our consciousness to it. Otherwise, it can be in this room, it can be sitting on your lap, but it will bring no benefit to you. Because nothing can come into you except through an activity of your consciousness. In other words, your body can't admit anything to you. Your eyes, your ears. There has to be consciousness before any part of the body functions. In the absence of consciousness, there's a corpse. Do you see that? Now, just as you cannot study music except through your consciousness, you cannot study art, literature, mathematics. These can only enter you through entering your consciousness. So it is with God. God is available, but the Master says, do you have eyes and do not see? Do you have ears and do not hear? In other words, can't you admit into your consciousness, into your inner vision, this thing called God? Or are you blind to its presence? Are you deaf to its presence? And the answer for most of us most of the time is yes. We are not listening and we're not looking for it. We are so busy going ahead with what we are doing and how we are doing it that we leave no room for the transcendental and invisible presence and power that can transform our lives. We make no room for it. Now then, if any benefit is to enter your experience, it must enter through your consciousness. It must enter through an activity of your consciousness, so that if you hope eventually to be guided by the still small voice, to be led, to be directed by infinite intelligence, you, through an act of consciousness, must open your eyes and ears to that invisible. Now, that must become a daily practice. And I don't mean once a day, I mean a daily practice all day. Because it's very, very difficult at first. We are just accustomed to jumping out of bed and under the shower, into the tub, into our clothes and down to breakfast and out to the office. And it won't do in the spiritual world. In that time between bed and leaving the house for the office, there should already have been 12 opportunities for opening that ear for the realization of the presence of the Christ. And so you can imagine how many 100 times it must happen during the day until that day comes when it is no longer a conscious activity, a thought activity, when it is something that takes place as automatically as our digestion does. Do you see that? Now, never believe for a moment that just by saying, oh, I leave it to God, that you really and truly are leaving it to God, because you aren't. If you really were, it would always be perfectly done. No, very seldom are you leaving it to God when you say you're leaving it to God. You are just evading the issue and hoping that it'll come out right and justify you. Actually, when you can truthfully say, I leave it to God, is when you have come to the place where 30, 40, 50 times a day you actually do open your consciousness and say, all right, Father, take over, or just blink the eye in recognition of the activity of the Christ or presence of the Christ. Then you can say, I've turned it over to God. But don't think for a minute that once a week you can turn something over to God. You can't. There's no God waiting. God is only on the scene in proportion as we consciously open our consciousness to its activity. Otherwise, you are living under the law. This wise, you are living under grace. Now, without this opening of consciousness to God or the realization of the Christ, you are living under the law, and you may be affected by weather, or you may slip in the bathtub, or your car may run into a telegraph pole, or any one of the thousands of things that happen to human beings can come nigh your dwelling place while you're under the law, while you're leaning only unto your own understanding, while you are trying to navigate your life alone. But from the moment that you agree with yourself, from the moment that you agree to admit the Christ into your relationship with everyone on earth, admit the Christ into your meal time, admit the Christ into your business life, home life, marketing, shopping, purchasing life, from that moment on, you move out from under the law and begin to live under grace. Why under grace? Because having admitted the Christ is always going before you to make the crooked places straight. The Christ is always walking beside you as protection, as it were. Actually, there's nothing to be protected from. It's a term meaning that in the realization of this Christ, the discords and inharmonies of human experience evaporate. And so it is that we live under grace when we live through the Spirit of Christ. Paul gives it to us in this way, that I can do all things through Christ which strengtheneth me. Do you see that? Now, we might say the same identical thing, that if before coming to this desk I have opened myself to the activity of the Christ, then I can be assured that the class will be well taken care of because the Christ has been admitted to care for it. Not my memory of something that I knew yesterday, not my memory of something I've read or written, but actually whatever the presence of God wishes to deliver to this class will come through if I have admitted the Christ into the experience. It won't come through if I try to live by memory or what I've known before or read before or something of that kind. And so it is in every business transaction. When we rely on our own understanding, on our own judgment, on our own capacity, We may have lots of success and some failures, and sometimes the failures will outweigh the successes. But whether or not we do have all successes, we will not have the complete satisfaction and permanence that will come to us through admitting the Christ into our experience, because then under all conditions, all circumstances, we can rest in peace knowing that this invisible God is on the scene. It is in the same way that we are taught in the message of the infinite way to meet every situation in our experience with some spiritual, possibly scriptural passage in this wise. Supposing we have something to do tomorrow, something that at first thought looks like a hard job, or even something beyond us, too difficult, requiring too much of us. We are taught to turn within for some spiritual or scriptural passage that will help us meet that situation, and usually it will be something like, He performeth that which is given me to do, or He perfecteth that which concerneth me. And then with that assurance we are able to drop our responsibility, because there again we have admitted He, we have admitted God or the Christ into our experience. Or supposing we are facing some situation where more is demanded of us than we believe we have, probably more money than we think we have or can afford, or something requiring more strength than we believe that we have, or something requiring more patience or more kindness or more tolerance or more forgiveness. At least something more is going to be demanded of us than we feel confident that we have, and so we can turn to another Bible passage and remember, Thy grace is my sufficiency. And so I will meet this situation not with money or with muscles or with strength or with advice, but with Thy grace. So the secret of spiritual living actually consists in our ability to attain this constant conscious presence, or the consciousness of this invisible presence, until it becomes so alive, so real in us, that it is as real as our right hand. It is as real to us as our checkbook or pocketbook. It is as real to us as anything in the physical realm. Those who attain this realization always have the awareness of an abiding presence. It appears in different ways, so that each one realizes it in some different way, but always there is an assurance that there is something more here in this chair than just me. And that something else is this invisible power, if you call it that, presence, if you call it that, the Christ, the Spirit of God, the Comforter. And you can't have it and not know it. It always makes itself known. But you prepare the way for its entrance, and you prepare the way for its operation in your experience through this daily practice in every single way. Now, whilst appreciating that we do not take a problem into prayer, are we not ever to sit quietly and seek a solution all round the problem on the human level too? Well, now, you see there are two different subjects there. If we have a problem and we are now turning to God, we cannot turn to God and say, where will I get a bank loan? Or should I go out of business or stay in business? That is kind of making a human counselor out of the divine spirit. So at that stage of our experience, when we are turning for spiritual guidance, even though it is a problem concerning business or finances or sales or invention or manufacture or family, even though it is that, we are now going to sit back and turn from that problem. And we're going to open our consciousness specifically for a realization of God's presence, of the Christ. The problem may try to intrude itself into our thought. We'll have to talk back to it. Get thee behind me, Satan. I'm not interested in you. My function now is to realize God's presence. And you will achieve it. You will come to the realization of God's presence. Whether you do it the first time you try it is not the criterion. If you practice it, you eventually will attain the ability to sit down and come into actual realization of the presence of God. Now you will find that when you have that, you will either very quickly see the solution to your problem, or you will be led to go to a ball game, or if it's night, to go to bed. And if the latter, you'll wake up in the middle of the night or early in the morning, and the solution will be as plain as if it were written on your ceiling. Or you may turn it away, throw it out of your mind, and then in a moment that ye know not, the answer will flash right back in. Or you will sit down quietly with pen and pencil, and you just start writing and figuring and thinking about your problem, not with concern or anxiety, but to let this solution flow that now will flow not from you, not from your understanding, but from this contact which you have made with the divine. Certainly, we do not sit on cloud 9 and deny that we have a human experience, nor do we try to avoid it or to evade it, but we try not to tackle it until we have the realization of God as our partner in the deal. Is that clear? Now, you see, there is no escapism to that, because we are not trying to avoid the issues of life, but we are trying not to tackle them until we are sure that we have the Spirit of God working in us and through us and with us in all of our ways. Once you have the assurance that God is on the field, certainly then sit down and map out your advertising campaign or something else. One of the things that we most frequently complained about in the old days of my experience in Christian Science was that we used to say, never go to a dentist who is a Christian Scientist, never go to a lawyer who is a Christian Scientist. They're always depending on God to do their work, and they just sit by and know the truth. Now don't go to the kind of a person who isn't thorough in their business. Be sure that if they're an attorney, that they're very thorough in looking up every phase of the work. And if they're a dentist, be sure that it's a dentist who isn't depending on God to do his sanitation work for him or so forth. Now, we, with the Spirit of God, are very thorough workmen. We leave nothing to chance. We leave nothing to just, trust God and he'll do it. We don't have that kind of attitude. Our attitude is that before we undertake anything, we make sure that we have attained some realization of the presence of God, and then we sit down and do a thorough job of whatever it is we are doing. Yes, I remember back in those days that some of the ladies used to say they don't want maids in their home who were Christian Scientists because they do too much praying and too little dusting. Well, of course that wasn't always true, but there was just enough truth in it for those sayings to go around, like the ones about the Model T Fords, you know. But actually, when a person is spiritually endowed, when a person is touched by the Spirit, they become very thorough workmen. They leave nothing to chance. The Spirit itself guides them to go to the right places for their information, to find the right people to help them. And nothing is left just to chance or let God do it. No. But before you undertake your work, whether it's bridge building, I told this, I think, in London. I don't think I've told you about it. We have in California a Golden Gate Bridge. Now, for I don't know how many generations, it was known that a bridge across Golden Gate would be a very desirable thing. In fact, would solve many problems. But every bridge builder in the States tried to design a bridge across Golden Gate, and each one gave it up. Each one in turn said, it's an impossibility, it can't be done. And then along came a Mr. Harris and did it. And when he was asked, and he is often asked, how did you find that solution to it? His answer was, I prayed. God gave me the answer. But of course, you will admit, if you see that bridge, that he prayed, but he was a thorough workman too. Now, so with us, this means of spiritual living does not result in frustration, and it is not escapism. It is the most practical way of living in a practical universe that you can possibly know, because when you have attained the ability to live through this realization of the Christ with it, and have it with you on all occasions, you'll find how practical it is in helping you meet your bills and keep your body well and keep your home in order. Oh, you'll be surprised when once you see it operate how practical it is. Will you please explain the subconscious mind and the part it plays? No, I'm sorry, I can't explain it because I don't know what it is. I have never learned anything about the subconscious mind and don't know even if there is one. So I'm not in a position to explain it. I know of only one mind, and that is God. And I know that we, when we live without this conscious realization of the presence of the Christ, are not living through that mind, but rather through our finite concept of that mind, and therefore we are never attaining our full capacities. But I do not know those divisions called subconscious, conscious, superconscious. I've never come into experience with them. How am I to know my purpose and plan in life if I am to cut out all desires and ambition? Now again, that is a misunderstanding. If we desire to be a businessman when actually we should be a professional man or artistic man, we may thwart our life plan. Whereas if while we perform our everyday functions that are given us to do, if we in our prayers, in our communion, turn to the Father within and in the sense of reveal the plan for me, reveal my purpose in life, keeping on doing right now what we are doing while we're doing it, and yet praying this inner prayer for guidance, the way will open to lead us out of what we are doing into what we should be doing. Now that doesn't mean giving up ambition. On the contrary, it is indicative of the fact that we are ambitious to be fulfilled. We are ambitious to see ourselves functioning in a rightful order. When I speak of desires and ambitions, I'm speaking of the full sense of these that lead men to become dictators or lead men to positions in and out of government, in and out of business, that takes them into high places without due regard and consideration for the rights of the world. In other words, false ambition I speak of as being erroneous, not a rightful ambition. Certainly it is a rightful ambition to be successful. It would be a wrongful ambition merely to be successful to acquire $1 million. And so one has to understand what they mean by desires and ambitions. It's right to desire the realization of God. It is right to desire that God fulfill itself in harmony in our daily living. But to go into God in prayer with a specific desire that we want God to fulfill results in failure, because God does not fulfill our desires. God fulfills itself in us. Do you think when passing from this earth plane, we would recognize our dear ones who have gone before us? Well, that term dear ones would be subject to interpretation. We are always brought into union or oneness with those who for some reason should form part of our consciousness. Now, if there is a reason for us being reunited, we will be. And if there isn't a reason, we will function some other place. The same law prevails there as here. You will find that for 3 years Jesus was not united with his mother or his family. Why? They lived only a few miles away from each other, but their lives had nothing in common, and so their paths did not cross. When it came to the point of crucifixion, the family were all united again, and in that moment his mother attained her vision of the nature of her son, and therefore the Master indicated that from there on in they would be united, and he turned her over to his disciple for care, which must have meant not so much for support as for spiritual teaching. In that consciousness they would be united. Had either one passed on before that, there would have been no reason for them being united, because they had no conscious interest in each other. So it is, we right now on this plane, some of us do not see our own families, do not see our own brothers and sisters for years and years and years and years and years, and they live right down the street from us. But why should we meet when the only bond there is between us is that we had the same mother and father? There's no other bond. We have no interests in common. We have no thought in common. We have no life in common. Well, why should we clutter up each other's time just because we accidentally were born to the same mother and father? And if that relationship continues unto the departure from this earth, I can't possibly see any reason for meeting them somewhere else. Certainly I'm not meeting them here. What do I want to meet them there for? But on the other hand, if you and I are united in this work, in this teaching, so that we have a common bond, we love this work, we love this concept of God, we love this life of Christ together, I doubt whether the grave is ever going to separate us. As a matter of fact, I'm sure that it is not going to separate any of us who finally attain a common bond in this spiritual relationship. Not even the grave will sever us from each other, but it may well sever us from some of our friends and relatives. Now, if you mean dear ones in the sense that I mean it right here, those who are a part of my spiritual household and whom I always want to know and meet, if there are those who are a part of your life and you are a part of theirs, not even the grave will separate you. And I can go a step further and speak with authority that if either you or your dear one depart from this experience, that you won't have to wait for the other one to depart to meet. You don't ever have to be separated. The relationship can continue just as if there were no interruption. And the reason is this: your dear one is not dead. Your dear one has not gone anyplace unless you eject them from your consciousness. And I began this evening by saying to you that nothing happens except that which happens in your consciousness. If you drop someone out of your consciousness, they're gone from it. And that means whether they're still on this plane or not. But on the other hand, those whom you hold in your consciousness remain there forever, and even the experience of the grave will prove to be no separation. My mother's right here. When you say that prayer is not an asking for anything, but purely a realization of God, how would you regard a prayer for increased ability to realize God, increased ability to love and trust and so forth? I would agree with that form of prayer. I would agree with any desire or request of a spiritual nature. If you will turn to the Lord's Prayer, you will find that it says, "Give us this day our daily bread." But if you study the writings of the Master, you will find that he did not mean baker's bread. He didn't use the word in the meaning of baker's bread. When he said, "I am the bread," he wasn't talking about a loaf of baker's bread, and you know it. He was talking about the spiritual substance of life. And so when he prayed, "Give us this day our daily bread," he was praying, "Give us this day, Father, the realization of thy presence. Give us the conscious realization of spiritual substance. Open our eyes to the presence of divine grace." In the same way, when he said, "I have meat ye know not of," he certainly wasn't talking about butcher's meat. You know that. He didn't carry around a package of butcher's meat with him when he said, "I have meat ye know not of." No, he was talking about meat with a capital M, the spiritual substance of life, the spiritual food. When we have enough of that, we require much less of material food. We can often miss meals and not miss them, or cut our meals in half, if we have enough spiritual bread and spiritual meat. When he said to the woman at the well of Samaria, "I can give you water, living waters," he didn't need that bucket to get it with, because he had it within his own being. And you don't think that water was material? And so when the Master prays, "Give us bread, meat, wine, water," he is talking about the activity and substance of God, the life of God, the love of God. And so when we talk about the blood of Jesus, we're not talking about these red and white corpuscles. We're talking about that immortal sense of life that Jesus so well knew. Then when we talk in that sense, we're talking correctly. And so it is. When we pray and we say, "Do not have any desires, do not have any ambitions," we mean do not take into your prayer material desires and material ambitions, but open yourself for the realization of God's grace. And whether you call it grace, "Thy grace is my sufficiency in all things." Now you see, when you say, "Thy grace is my sufficiency in all things," that word grace means bread, meat, wine, water, housing, clothing, transportation. "Thy grace is my sufficiency in all things." It doesn't make any difference what department of life. So really and truly you only have one thing to pray for: God's grace. And God's grace could also mean God's presence. "Thy presence is my sufficiency," or "Thy power is my sufficiency," or "Thy substance is my sufficiency," or "Thy wisdom is my sufficiency," or "Thy love is my sufficiency." And so you see, as long as we understand that God is spirit, we must go to God spiritually. That is what the Master meant when he said, "No longer shall you pray in this holy mountain, nor yet in Jerusalem." Now you know, when Jesus said that no longer shall you pray in Jerusalem, he was saying the same thing as if someone came in here and said, "You must never again pray in church," because that's what he meant. The holy temple in Jerusalem. You see, that temple in Jerusalem was considered so holy that the Hebrews had to go there once a year. That was compulsory, that they go there once a year to pray and to bring their offerings. If they didn't do that, they lost God's blessing. Well, they had to come from all over the Holy Lands. That's how come that Joseph and Mary were on their way to Jerusalem at that season of the year, that once in the year when every Jew had to appear at that temple in order to keep his standing with God. And yet, he violated the sacredness of that thing by saying, no more shall you do that. You must pray in spirit and in truth, and the Father loveth those that worship him in spirit and in truth. Not in temples, not in holy mountains, but in spirit and in truth. Now that is virtually the same thing as saying that in worshiping or praying to God, don't pray for material things, because God is spirit. But pray in spirit and in truth. Pray for the revelation of truth. Pray for the revelation and unfoldment of spirit. Pray for a realization of the presence of God. And then what? All these things shall be added unto you. All these things, food, raiment, housing, all these things will be added unto you if you pray only for spiritual things. It was a wonderful experience last summer to hear the #1 Roman Catholic of the United States, Bishop Sheehan, say to an audience of 10 million on television, may I close my program by saying to you, you must never pray to God for a material thing, because God does not answer such prayers. God is a spirit, and you must pray to God only for spiritual things. It's a marvelous thing for 10 million people to hear, who have been accustomed to going to church to pray for a new automobile or a new house or shingles.